Well, we began thinking in the last panel conversation about what different forms of meaningful learning might look like, some ideas about how we might begin to organize systems to support and encourage that kind of learning. We'll return to some of those questions in the last session. But obviously, if we're going to have meaningful learning in schools that really does prepare all students to be college and career ready and citizenship ready, the key to that is the capacity of professionals in the schools and the ways in which we build that capacity and develop what some of us have thought about as professional accountability, which is a very important part of the system as a whole. And so this next session takes up that topic. It is facilitated by my good friend Fred Frelow, who is the Senior Program Officer at the Ford Foundation. Fred focuses in his grant making on improving the quality of teaching in schools serving low-income, minority, and immigrant students. He has also been a program officer at the Rockefeller Foundation. He managed early college high schools at the Woodrow Wilson National Fellowship Foundation. He was the Director of National Affairs and Associate Director of Urban Initiatives at the National Commission on Teaching in America's Future, where we got an opportunity to work closely together. But probably more important than all of that is that he taught social studies, right, in Newton, Massachusetts for 12 years. He was the Director of Curriculum in Nyack, New York. He's been a part of school reform and professional capacity building on the ground for many, many years, and he is going to organize and lead us through this conversation with this esteemed panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Good, good. Well, I'm going to make this pretty straightforward. I'm going to introduce each of the panelists very quickly. I have a question I'm going to pose to each one of them, but as I said to them, my question is only to get them talking to you and to each other about these issues. So first we have, to my left here, we have Dennis Van Roekel. Dennis is the president of the National Education Association, which represents 3 million educators. In 2010, he established the commission that created NEA's Leading the Profession, an agenda for the teaching profession, including raising the bar for entry, ensuring teaching quality, and union leadership to transform the profession. He taught high school mathematics in Phoenix for 23 years. We have Leticia Smith-Evans, who's the interim director of the education practice for the NAACP, Legal Defense and Educational Fund. Leticia, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Leticia, thank you. Supports LDF's efforts to use legal, policy, and legislative advocacy to ensure access to equal educational opportunities in pre-K through higher education. She is a proponent of multi-stakeholder approaches to closing educational achievement and opportunity gaps. We have Marc Tucker. I could go on forever, but I'm going to keep it short, Marc. Marc is the president and CEO of the National Center on Education and the Economy. Marc is a longtime leader of the standards-based reform movement. He created the new standards, a 23-state consortium designed to develop internationally benchmarked student performance standards and assessments, and he's written a number of things I'm sure you're all aware of. We have Becky, and she said I can call her Becky. Pittard is a 4th and 5th grade math teacher at Pathway Elementary School in Ormond Beach, Florida. She is the devoted student of teaching and has applied the lessons of mathematics, education techniques used in Singapore, South Korea, Japan, and Europe to her classroom and for her students. In 2008, she won a presidential award for excellence in mathematics and science teaching. She was a member of the work team for the Common Core Standards in Mathematics. So we have a terrific panel with a wide range of experiences, and I know we're going to have a great conversation. So I'm going to start with you, Dennis, and I'm going to ask you, the National Education Association is promoting profession-ready teachers. How does that effort fit into conversations we are having today about new professional accountability and capacity?
In one word, perfectly. In my role, both as a teacher and in association work, there are good days and bad days, and there are great days. This is a great day. For us to be talking about what we're talking about, all of us believe in accountability. But what's different about this conversation is we're talking about accountability for the system, not a piece. And Linda said it so beautifully. I mean, there's accountability for creating the learning conditions for students, which is school readiness, the conditions of teaching and learning, as well as having high standards and curriculum. Then there is the professional, and that's what we're talking about. What's so perfectly, what we're talking about at NEA about being profession ready day one, I'm going to give you a quote. The Finnish Minister of Education was asked, at the height of our efforts in this country to get rid of any kind of due process for teachers, to get rid of all of those bad teachers, and they said to him, what do you do about incompetent teachers in Finland? And he said, we don't have any. And the audience did what you did. They chuckled and he said, no, I'm serious. We don't. You see, because in their system, they would say no one would ever be allowed to be teacher of record who isn't well qualified, trained, and licensed. And so when we talk about being profession ready, that's that continuum about how you recruit, how you train, and how you ensure through that training that they have a performance-based training to make sure they are ready, profession ready, day one. And then you move into the continuum about once they're there, it's not only the induction, but the continuous learning from day one until your last day. And to me, I love the idea of being nationally board certified, that we as a profession define where we want to end up, and that's where we ought to be. If we do it in all of the other professions, why in the world would we not do ours? And the last thing I would say about this profession ready day one, another part of the professional accountability is there's another track, and that is the hiring and assignment process. There has to be accountability. I mean, when I have legislators who say, what we need to do is get rid of all those bad teachers, I said, so if we could wave our magic wand and everyone that you think is bad is gone, do you think you solved the problem? My answer is no, you have not. Because what in the world allowed them to get there and stay there? The idea that there are unlicensed people allowed to be teacher of the record, somebody ought to be held accountable for that. Somebody ought to be held accountable. Or if you take a certified math teacher and tell me to teach poetry, those students are going to get cheated. And someone ought to be held accountable. So I think this professional side, the two tracks, one for the profession and the professional practice. The other track is the hiring assignment of teachers. All of that has to happen.
So let me just do a quick follow-up to that, because very often in this country, when we talk about accountability for teachers, it's largely in the context of teacher evaluation. So what should we be doing in terms of teacher evaluation, given this vision?
Someone mentioned the purpose of a test ought to be inform and direct. I think in teacher evaluation, it ought to be feedback and building and making you better. See, as again, the Finnish pair of glasses they're looking for, you're profession ready day one, but you're not done learning. And so good a teacher evaluation system is one that gives you feedback and allows you to grow. The same kind of, the student, Gemma, was up here talking about how in the student conversation, they learned, and she learned about what she wanted to research more. I'm a professional, I love that conversation. But the idea that we could build an accountability system for teachers based on 2 subjects, given 1 day of the year, is absurd, especially when you consider that only 30% of all teachers even teach those subjects in those grades. It's just crazy. But so instead, if you say this is a crazy system, they say, oh, you're opposed to accountability. No, I'm not. And I believe in quality, good teacher evaluation. But the purpose of evaluation is not to find someone who's incompetent. The purpose of evaluation should be for every single professional to help them grow every day of their career, with the focus being on how to enhance student learning. So I believe in good teacher evaluation. It ought to provide feedback and an opportunity to grow.
That's great. That's terrific. Leticia, the Legal Defense Fund has been active in the fight for more equitable distribution of skilled teachers. Can you tell us what you think are the biggest problems that need attention and what we should be doing to achieve teacher equity?
Sure. Thank you for having me today, and it's great to be here and speak with all of you. So I just want to let you all know, if you don't know, that LDF is we actually litigated the Brown versus Board of Education case. And I think that with any of these discussions that we have, particularly this one, it's important to recognize how this country is at the place that it's at with respect to education. And although Brown occurred 60 years ago, there was staunch resistance to the Supreme Court's decision to desegregate schools. Why is that important? Because 14 years after the Supreme Court's decision in Brown, the court set forth a number of factors called green factors. And among those factors is faculty assignment in schools. Today, at LDF, we continue to litigate a number of cases. We have over 100 on our docket currently still that are under court order to desegregate. And we do look very closely at faculty assignment. And so what I know, based on my experience on the ground, is that even in a district where there are all, a Title I district, all the schools are Title I schools receiving funds, that there is still disparities with respect to the distribution of teachers, and that's problematic. I was in Tennessee yesterday and on Monday in a district, and there were a number of teachers whom I met with, all of whom were certified, all of whom were tenured, and many of them lost their jobs to other folks who were non-tenured and who were not certified. Some of them were asked to teach in areas that they were not certified in. And so when we look at the disparities that we see with respect to student achievement, we wonder why they exist, and I think that we're not looking at all the possibilities about what's going on. So I just wanted to share a little bit about what we're doing and how we actually engaged in this effort in a different way than many of my fellow panelists. We actually do question, we look line by line. We ask the districts every year, again, these are districts that are still under court order to desegregate, for a breakdown of the positions they intend to hire for, the positions they intend to eliminate, the announcements that they are putting out, and then we ask for a breakdown of whom they've hired, and are these individuals actually certified, and if they are they actually assigned to classrooms to teach in those particular areas? And oftentimes the answer is no. So that's what I'll share for now.
Great.
But wait, you know what? Let me just give you one other thing, just to dig a little bit deeper. So if that were not the issue in the district per se, I would say that what needs to happen is that there needs to be a serious look at whatever data is present and what's going on in the district. And then I think there need to be serious determinations made about how you can address the gaps and the needs that are evident. And then there needs to be a plan that's developed. I think that process, it's imperative that includes the entire school community, and that does not just involve administrators and teachers. I think it involves advocates who are in the community, parents, and possibly students as well. So I think that that's imperative in addressing any sort of situation like this and implementing a new process such as the one that Dennis spoke about.
Right. Marc, what have you learned about accountability from other countries, and if I may, how do you think that is connected to professional capacity?
Well, let me begin by adding my voice to Dennis's and Paul Leather's and express real appreciation to Linda and her colleagues for pulling this meeting together. This is a crucial topic in American conversation, and it is long overdue. Thank you. To get to the topic at hand, Jack Jennings, the very highly regarded founder of the Center for Education Policy and in many respects the keeper of the national scorecard on federal legislation, especially No Child Left Behind, recently commented that he can see no improvement in student performance for the country as a whole and for the groups of vulnerable students for which it was intended as a result of the passage of No Child Left Behind. It has been 14 years. There is actually, to come to your question, no surprise in this. If you look at the strategies pursued by the top performing countries in the world in education, you will look in vain for a strategy that looks anything like No Child Left Behind. This is not an accident. If you had attended, as I had and Dennis has, and Linda has, the meetings of the International Teacher Quality Group, you would have understood from those participating that the people who are in charge of those education systems have looked at our accountability system and rejected it. The system is not only not performing the way it was advertised, it is probably making things worse, as Linda pointed out earlier. There's a lot of evidence that very good teachers are leaving teaching because they cannot stand the circumstances in which they're teaching as a result of this policy. Applications for admission to teachers' colleges are plummeting. I cannot prove that that is the result of the current environment, but I would be very surprised if it is not. It is very clear that people who have options in high-status professions in the United States will not consider going into teaching now under the current circumstances. We're looking at a set of policies that were, in my view, born in anger. At the time No Child Left Behind was passed, over the preceding 20 years, the cost of educating each student in the United States had gone up in real after-inflation dollars more than 240%. And the performance of our kids on the 4th grade NAEP reading test was absolutely flat. And Congress was fed up. In my view, we look at No Child Left Behind. What we're looking at is Congress demanding value for their money. They wanted to light a fire under teachers, and they wanted to punish those who wouldn't respond. To me, this is perfectly understandable and represents a total misunderstanding of the actual situation. From my perspective, the teachers were caught in a system they did not create. They were caught in a system designed for a totally different purpose, as I will get to in a moment. We need to ask ourselves how the teachers could be blamed for all of this when it was the school boards who gave away all the management prerogatives that they had as an alternative to raising teachers' pay, while at the same time, the top-performing countries were working very hard to make beginning teachers' pay equal to that of engineers in their country. We need to ask ourselves why it was, if it was the teachers who were at fault, that state officials kept approving programs of teacher education that have become a national joke. We need to ask ourselves why, if it was teachers who were at fault, this picks up on a point that Dennis just made, legislators, year in and year out, would waive the already very low standards for teachers in order to put a warm body in front of the students, while the top-performing countries were making sure, as Dennis said, that there was no shortage of great teachers. In the top-performing countries, there is a surplus of great teachers because of the policies they have pursued over the last 20 or 30 years. The fact of the matter is that we are looking at a failed system for which all of us are responsible. And it is pointless to chase the blame. The real issue here is how we fix the system. The great tragedy, in my view, of what has happened since the passage of No Child Left Behind is that it has blinded us to the real challenge that we face. What's happened over the last 30 years in the global economy is responsible directly for the education challenge. We used to compete with the people next door, and now we compete with people all over the world. The United States has a very high wage structure compared to that of many other countries. The result of that is very simple. We have a system in place designed about 100 years ago to produce about an 8th grade level of literacy for most of our students. That's what it does. That's what it still does. The only problem is that with the changes in the world economy, people who leave high school with only an 8th grade level of education can look forward to a life of economic struggle, period, full stop. The countries that have the finest performing education systems understood this years ago, and they set out to do something extremely difficult, which was to produce a new kind of education system designed to produce for all students a kind and level of education that they had previously thought possible only for an elite. The United States has bounced back and forth over the last 40 or 50 years between concentrating on quality and concentrating on equity. We have never seemed to be able to do the same thing at the same time. But it is precisely what these other countries are doing. Very high access and equity combined with very high quality for all students. I guarantee you that cannot be done with the system we have. The answer to your question is, these other countries recognized they had to redesign the system from the bottom up. United States student performance is not low because teachers are lazy or venal. It is because they're working in a system that was never designed to produce an elite style of education for all students. In a couple of weeks, my organization, the National Center on Education and the Economy, will release a report on accountability, and we will make these points in great detail. We will also lay out what we think a new style accountability system could look like. But I think it's very important to recognize that the new style accountability system we need has got to be set in a new style system. We actually have an accountability system in the United States that is thoroughly consistent with the education system we have. It's just that that's wrong. It's designed for circumstances we faced 100 years ago. We need a new accountability system, and we need a new system of education to match it. There isn't enough time for me to summarize what you will find in our report in a couple of weeks, so I just want to highlight one piece of it. It's the piece I was just asked to highlight. And that is this. What you see in the countries that are top performers is a redesign of accountability. And one aspect of that is moving from a kind of accountability system designed for blue-collar work and blue-collar workers to a very different kind, which is designed for professional work and professional workers. In a blue-collar system, it is the brains are in the managers, or so the people who designed the system thought. And so they decide what is needed and what has to be done. And the accountability system couldn't be simpler. The workers are responsible for doing what they're told. And if they do that, all is well. And if they don't, they get fired. It's very simple. It is actually the system that is now dominating the United States education accountability system. Think about what a modern, large, successful law firm looks like here in the United States or elsewhere. Couldn't be more different. The people who are the attorneys are also the owners and the managers. There isn't management on one side and labor on the other. It is the people who are the professionals who make the big decisions about how the work is going to get done. It is organized in a way in which there is a clear career progression. As you get better and better at the work, you get more responsibility. As you get more responsibility, you get more authority. As you get more authority, you get much more freedom of action, professional autonomy.
Let me stop you there.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that. Becky, I had a question for you, but since you've heard all of this, I'm going to leave it open for you to respond to what you've heard. I'll stop right there.
Well, that's open-ended.
There
Thank
you
you. Well, I do also want to thank Linda and the team who organized this event for including a teacher voice. One of the hopes that and one of the changes that I have seen in the last 5 to 8 years is that as committees are formed, teachers are part of those committees. I've been teaching for 25 years, and I would submit to you 25 years ago, I'm not too sure I would have been sitting as part of this panel. So I thank you for all of you experts in the field for asking for a teacher's voice and getting the story from the people that go eyeball to eyeball with our children. In response to what I've heard this morning, it's exciting. Come home with me. I would like you to come home with me. I fully agree with what I'm hearing and the change in the system, and I'm just over here nodding at what Dennis had to say, that our system of accountability right now, it does not meet the current demands and the current needs, and that it was set up for that industrial model of years ago. I was blessed for 15 years to have a principal who turned to each one of us teachers and said, literally, I so honor what you do. Now, what can I do to help you? And when our principal did that, there were a block of caring, passionate teachers who went to work. And that is when we turned to our principal and said, beyond all that you have mentioned this morning, is we turned to her and said, we need time. The system right now is zapping our time, it's zapping our energy. As a teacher, I need time to, number one, think about these marvelous, rich ideas that the content experts and experts in the world of teaching, the research people, I need time to read that research, think about it, and discuss it with my peers. What does that look like in our classrooms in Volusia County, Florida? What does that look like for our children to try to implement some of these innovations that people are coming? One of the reasons that he stated that I have studied the methods of Japan and Singapore and thinking mathematics, I will have to say, started on that journey. I didn't do that alone. I sat down with a group of peers because our principal said, you're right, you need time, you need the energy, let's make it. And she made it in our system. I sat down with my peers and we studied the Singapore textbooks. We studied the Japanese textbooks, translated into English, and we discussed what was different. And why might it be better? And how could we implement it in our classroom? So we studied our craft. We were given the time to study our craft. But beyond that, I need the time to study my students. Right now, I so appreciate formative assessment that as a professional, I assess where my students are, my children are, and that determines where I move next. But I'm doing it on the fly. I'm doing it in a split second. And that is part of what we teachers do. But I also need time to sit down and look at what children do, look at their performance and think, why are they doing that? Why did they say that? And then reflect on what questions can I ask, what tasks can I bring forth that would move these children forward. So I would like to add to this discussion about the system and improving the system is we need to provide time, which will give energy for our teachers to think about our students, the content we are teaching, and teaching strategies.
So Becky, a quick follow-up to that. So you imply that maybe a policy change should be around time. What are other two or three other specific policy changes that you think would advance this collective practice of professional accountability that you're talking about? I
think this whole movement toward teacher leadership is critical. There are many of us who have the need for leadership. This model of listening to the boss and just doing what the boss said is not part of the makeup of many, 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 many teachers. Mm-hmm. We have our own ideas about what will move education forward. Mm-hmm. And to put teachers in charge of professional development, to sit teachers on committees such as this, and when the Common Core math standards were written, as a teacher, a member of that, developing these teacher leaders, I think it's critical to moving forward the teaching profession forward. That would certainly be one of them.
Great, great. And Leticia, I had a follow-up for you before. Do we go to questions after this? Okay. How do you think we can actually get the best teachers into the classrooms where they're most needed?
Okay. I think that's a difficult question to answer. I think that because precisely the point that you just raised, that too often teachers are not involved in the discussion and too often they're not part of the decision-making process. So again, I just told you about meeting with a number of teachers yesterday and the day before, and those teachers they all wanted to be in the classroom. They all wanted to teach, whether they were, had certificates in science or whatever it was. But that decision was not being made by them. And I just want to say, I've heard some of my co-panelists mention system 100 years ago, and we have to definitely, in addressing this issue, understand that the system was not built to serve all children in this country. I argue that the majority of us in this room, I hope everyone in this room, thinks that all children, irrespective of race, and other factors, should be served. But it wasn't designed to serve all children, and it's still not designed to serve all children today, which is why in my opinion, there is an attack on the public education system, unfortunately. I think that we have to address that, and recognizing that with respect to resources, again, I see that where there are Title I districts, the whole district's Title I, that the resources are allocated in ways that are very disproportionate. So whether there's a school that predominantly serves African American students or one that serves predominantly white students, completely different resources. When I look at the capital needs plans that are submitted, not by the teachers, but by the school board or their superintendent to the state for funding, I will see the predominantly white school is requesting $3 million for the year, and the predominantly black school is requesting not even $100,000. When I walk into these schools, the predominantly African American school has teachers pulling me to the side and saying, my kids don't have textbooks, and then I talk to parents and their children are telling them 2 of them are sitting in a math class sharing one textbook, when the predominantly white school has a group of textbooks that they can use in the classroom and one that they can keep at home. So we're talking about something that goes much deeper than, can we just fix it, right now? And I think in order to fix it, we have to just understand and recognize. I hear Finland, Singapore, other places. Unless you mention South Africa to me, there's no place that you can compare the history of where we've been and where we are today. So I think we just have to, again, I know I've said it 50 times, but recognize the system and how it was built and why we are where we are today. Yeah. And I know I didn't answer your question.
But you did in a way, and that really segues to our next question.
Okay.
I think both Mark and Linda and people have written that what is really unique about some of these other systems is that more money goes to more needy schools. There are more immigrant students in Finland, and where there are more needy schools in other places. That's the reason why good teachers are flocking to those places. At least that's what I've read, and they can correct me. But I think we should open it up to questions right now. Is that correct? Please come up to the mics here, state your name, and please have a question for us. You can make a brief statement if you want to, but let's have a question. You can have it to the entire panel, or you can have it to specific people on the panel.
My name is Kim Irby, and I'm the co-founder of the Mother's Agenda of New York. And my concern is that accountability must include the future. Now that we know systemically what the problem is, that whatever it is that we redesign, we must be thinking forward so that it doesn't happen again. So what are we going to put in place so that this does not replicate itself again? For all the children that are coming after us. And my other concern is that when you're building supposedly from the bottom up, there aren't enough parents in this room today. I don't believe we were invited on the level that I would have liked to have seen parent panel, so then you could really get a voice about parents and our advocacy and the level of partnership that we have with teachers. We love to work with our teachers. Our teachers need us on the ground up, and whatever we build, you must ensure that we are at the forefront and that our concerns are heard and that you respect us as being professionals at raising our children, having a vision for education, and that I come with an idea of what education should look like, and that we create accountability for parents as well. We are accountable for our children. We are not just throwing it on the professionals, as some may think, but we are accountable. But what are we going to put in place for the future?
Okay, so excellent statement. So what are we going to put in place for the future with respect to accountability? But I would add, if you allow me, in terms of professional accountability as well. So Dennis, why don't you go?
I think as you build for the future, there are 3 questions we need to ask, and the first one is what you talked about, and that is, what is it that we want for all children in our district, state, nation? And we have to really honestly talk about that, because Leticia said it was not designed to educate all children. It was not designed, and what the saddest thing about a system is it only produces what it's designed to produce. And that's why the dropout rate really doesn't vary over 25 years. It was designed that way. So you got to be willing to first define what public education means in the 21st century. What do you want it to do? What is its purpose? And if you think that's an easy conversation, I would submit to you it's not. But you must involve parents and community and people to say, let's talk about what we wanted to do. The second question, what do we need to do to make that happen? That's where the systems change comes in. And that's where the accountability for that system comes in, because you can't say those things and then not provide the mechanism to do it. So for No Child Left Behind, since 2002, I can tell you year after year after year which students are not getting what they deserve and what we said we wanted for them. When is it that we move from saying, yep, they're not getting it, to making something change so they get it? So the second part of that is, how do we make that happen? And then the third question is, what are the resources needed to make that? We often ask that question first. We decide the answer of what we're willing to put in, and then we design a system that fits that amount. It's wrong. And Mark talked about all of these other countries. They decided what they wanted for all children, and it had to do with equity. And then they designed a mechanism to do that, and now they're putting resources in there to make it happen, and lo and behold, it works. So building for the future first starts with purpose. You have to know what it is you want that system to do for which children, and it better be for all, and then design the mechanism to make it happen.
Yeah. Let me ask Mark, and then I'll come to you, Becky, because Mark was involved in the whole standards movement 20 years ago. I'm sure 20 years ago, as he looked forward to your question, he would not imagine that we would be in a position we are. So this sort of caution around forward thinking, I think, is a fabulous question, and I wonder what you would have to say about that.
For me, it's very simple. The OECD publishes a graph. It's got two axes on it. And one is for equity and one is for quality. And in the northeast part of that chart, those countries that are very high in equity and very high in quality. The United States is at the other end of the chart. I want to move us to the northeast part of the chart. And if you look at the countries that are already in the northeast part of the chart, I won't go into the whole thing, but the key points are the following. One is, as I think Dennis said, more resources go to the kids who are hardest to educate than go to the kids who are easiest to educate. And that mostly has to do with the ratio between teachers and kids in the school. There are more teachers in the schools serving kids who are hard to educate. Number two, they have very high standards. They really are benchmarked to the world's best countries, and they are unforgiving about the standards. The standards are very high. The difference is they're organized to meet those standards for all kids. The key to that, basically, is having absolutely first-rate teachers who have been very well trained and are very well supported once they are in the schools. We are recruiting our teachers, probably, it looks as though, from the bottom quarter of the kids who graduate from our high schools and go to college. They are recruiting theirs from the top quarter, the top 20%, the top 15%, in the case of South Korea, the top 5%. That makes a giant difference. We're sending our kids to teachers' colleges for which there is a very low regard. In the countries with the best performance, many of them are now sending their teachers to their research universities to get trained. Totally different picture. Once they're in the schools, it's a totally different picture again. Again, it's too long to summarize, but there is an emerging pattern for how you organize and manage schools, very different from the United States, in which the whole school is organized so that teachers are constantly improving their competence until the day they leave after a full career. These are countries, as I said earlier, in which there is a surplus of first-rate teachers. That's my aim, to get us to the northeast part of the chart, and I think all those things are going to be necessary and a lot more.
Becky, you wanted to weigh in? We'll do that before we come to the next question.
Okay, very quickly. First, I want to say amen to your comments about the partnership between teachers and parents. I can tell you that the toughest challenges I faced with students over the years are the students who have parents who are not engaged in their children's education. It is very hard to fight the home life as a teacher. So I fully support what you said about that. Secondly, while my colleagues can address the system, I will address the accountability for teachers. I think that we have a lot of ideas, strong ideas, effective ideas here in the nation. The National Board for Professional Teaching Standards has identified 5 core propositions that strong and effective teachers do. It's there. It's written in black and white. It's specific. It's guiding. It forces teachers who go through that process to reflect on their teaching. So I think an accountability measure for teachers based on those core propositions of the National Board. And my district uses Danielson, which is based on the National Board's work. And so the accountability as a teacher, I welcome it. Please assess me, give me input about the environment and the joy of learning within my classroom, my knowledge of content, my knowledge of students, my ability to monitor student progress, my ability to grow in my knowledge of my profession, and how do I interact with my peers to support other teachers in the growth of teaching as a profession. So I think in answer to your question about the future, we have some benchmarks. We have some guideposts out there right now. We just want to make sure that they are well put into place.
Next question, please.
Okay. I'm Joan Duvall Flynn. I chair the Education Committee for the Pennsylvania State Conference of NAACP branches. PSEA retired. So my question is for everyone. And I'm just wondering, could you agree that there is a missing component to the discussion on accountability and student acquisition of knowledge and skills for the global society? And that missing discussion might be, how are the children? So my question is, do we not also need to study the social supports in societies that have successful students? For example, their systems of healthcare, universal healthcare, or other family and human supports in those systems. And do we need to consider the pervasive emotional and psychological trauma impeding the school performance of the children who score poorly on these national tests? For example, the persons who analyzed the PISA found this high correlation with the United States scores between poverty and low scores. They also, surprisingly to me, found a high correlation between the math scores of middle school kids, boys, and divorce, which reflect emotional and psychological trauma. And then do we need to consider the policy, the teacher education programs, and the specific support services that address the needs of wounded children? And we might refer to Attorney General Holder's national research on the condition of children, finding that 60% of this nation's children have experienced or live in continuous emotional and psychological trauma.
Go ahead. 2 quick points. Number 1, on the PISA results, there are so many pieces of data in there that are left unanalyzed about what it really says, and then to say, and if that's what it says, what do we do about it? One quick one based on your comments. If you look at all kids in America who take that assessment, where they attend schools where there is 40% less than 40% poverty, we're number 1 in the world. So excellence, we got some of that. Equity, we don't. So we need to, by the way, as a math teacher with the X and Y axes and the quadrants, I've never heard it called the Northeast before. I like that. I'm going to use that in the future. The second point, I so agree with the comments, and I believe when Linda talks about the one area of meaningful learning, I know of no parent who comes and says the only thing I care about is content knowledge for my son or daughter. I want to know about the whole child. And that's where you take into account, is the child happy? Do they have the support service they need, whether it be health or other? But do we have a system that removes the obstacles that stops any child from succeeding to their best of their ability? So I think that's part and parcel of what it means to have meaningful learning environment, that you deal with a whole child, not this piece, and only content, And even worse, only 2, mathematics and language arts, as if the others aren't important. They all are.
I just want to say quickly, I agree 100% with the comments you made, and I think it's imperative. I think that many teachers, especially new ones, go to the classroom not having any idea of what the students that they're teaching face on a daily basis. They don't really have an understanding of their living conditions, and obviously the resources in the classroom are very limited. And you know, every child will not have a parent that's able to come to school for open school night or during the day because of their schedules. But it's imperative then for us to understand who you can reach out to in the community to make those connections. I'm a former elementary school teacher. I taught in New York City, in Brownsville, Brooklyn, a very poor area, and the school was surrounded by housing projects. And I can tell you, when I first went into school, I felt like I was a social worker a majority of the time, not just a teacher. And it really took me understanding there are issues having to do with healthcare, there are issues having to do with housing, there are issues having to do with childcare. I taught first grade. Many of those students were caring for younger siblings. I'm like, you're a baby yourself, And so really trying to understand how to work within that system and not being responsible for just teaching content became part of my job. And I don't know that that's fair, but that's the reality that many of us face. I didn't have any resources, and my school was the best school, one of the best schools in the district. I bought the resources myself. Many people wouldn't do that. So the question that you answered is so important because there's this thought that you just go to school, either you're doing your homework or you're not doing your homework, or whatever it is, and that's it. And that's just it's not even half of the story.
What's good about this conversation, I don't know who's next, but Linda, we actually see how these 3 different areas are interconnected. So we're talking about resources, we're talking about professional capacity. The whole thing fits together very nicely. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maria DeHilio. I'm a youth organizer with the Albany Park Neighborhood Council in Chicago. I started doing this when I was 16, and I'm 24 today, so I've been doing this for about 8 years. And the reason why I say that is because in my experience, I've seen a lot of student movement happen since I started. But I wanted to take us into account that there's been student boycotts and student rallies and marches and press conferences and countless, efforts from young people to fight against testing and to fight against harsh discipline. And I want us to think about those for a second, but I also want us to think about, where I'm from in Chicago, Illinois has the highest racial disparity in the entire country. And that's what the Department of Education said earlier this year. And if we're taking that into account, and I'm also thinking about my experience, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but yeah, you. But you had said that this conversation about what it means to be a 21st century learner and how to survive in the 21st century, that's a hard conversation. I actually had that conversation when I was 17, when I was doing participatory action research with my group. And we were a bunch of 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds from Voices of Youth and Chicago Education Project. We sat down and we were like, our system is racist. And there's a lot of things that we need to happen. We're underfunded, we're under-resourced, and we're always left on the list. And what does it mean for us to be a lifelong learner and survive in the 21st century so we could compete globally? And those were the words that we were using. But we needed guidance from adults to tell us, hey, this is what that means, right? These are the words that you can use. Because we may not use those exact same words, but we do use them. So my question was, taking into account all the political landscapes that's in the United States, right? All the racial disparities that exist, not just in Illinois, and the systematic that exists, including harsh discipline in schools and punitive punishments, and all the other things that prevent young people from graduating high school career ready, then can we talk about concrete next steps that we could do together? Because young people are not in this table as well, right? So what can we do together right now instead of what can we do 2 years later in order to really get this started?
Okay, very good. So what I'm going to do, since we're running out of time, we only have 5 minutes left. I'm going to ask the panel to respond to that question and make in their sort of last comments. We'll start with Becky and work this way.
What can we do right now? It's going to take this kind of dialogue to get us moving, and it's going to take leadership to start moving this cumbersome entity forward. There's a bit of a lack of leadership and a lot of to move this system forward, and so that's one reason why this has been so encouraging to see people like Randy and Linda and Dennis and all these people coming together in one place and taking on the role as leaders. We need leaders who will help us move forward. So I think that's one of the first things we need to do is to identify those leaders who can move us forward and establish that communication. Somewhat along that lines, perhaps this kind of addresses your question too. Just as a closing remark, I would ask for all of you to go home with a sparkle in your eye and just a dance in your step. You have the greatest job in the world. You are helping our children. And whether you are a researcher or whether you are a teacher, you should do a hop, skip, and a jump just every once in a while because of the opportunity that you have. And if you would go home with a sparkle in your eye and a dance in your step about the hope for education of our children, perhaps that would spread. And perhaps it would spread strong enough and well enough that this depression about American education would start to fade. And I certainly think that that's one of the first steps we need to take is to dispel this feeling of hopelessness and discouragement in American education.
I've been thinking about that last question from the audience. Our organization has schools that we work with in the Mississippi Delta. We have schools that we work with elsewhere in the Deep South and in big cities around the country. And it is heartbreaking to go into schools where you see kids who desperately need the help that educators can offer and they're not getting it. And you want, with every fiber in your body, to help those kids. Not help the system, not help schools in general, but the kids you see right in front of you. And I understand that. But you're not going to like my answer to your question. In the work that we do around the country, we encounter everywhere policymakers who want it done during their time in office. They have a silver bullet, and they're not interested in complicated analyses of anything. If that continues, we're going to have more and more and more kids who we are failing. The countries that are Dennis, I love this. Dennis, if I can teach you something about mathematics, it has made my day. If we are going to have a nation,
corner of a graph.
if we're going to have a nation of kids who are in the northeast quadrant of that OECD chart, we have to build a new system. The countries that are now on top, that are serving all their kids, have not done this in 4 years, or 2 or 3. They have done it in 10, 20, and 30 years. I can name you countries. I can give you the history. It was not done overnight. If we cannot get our act together to decide that we want and need a new system and form a consensus about how to build it, we'll see more and more and more kids we want to help today and will not be able to.
I'll be brief. I know we're out of time, but I appreciate your comment and your question. And what we can do is exactly what Voices for Youth, is doing today and was doing years ago that you mentioned. Knowledge really is power, and people need to be empowered in their communities. That's parents, that's students alike. People need to understand that their experiences, and whether that's lack of resources or equitable distribution of teachers, is not the status quo. It doesn't have to be that way. Too many families accept that this is all there is, and that there are no other options. The initiatives that you referenced regarding school discipline, we've been dealing with that issue for decades in this country, and finally there's been significant movement over the last year, but that's largely because of people on the ground in communities, students, parents, and other organizers alike. So that's the same sort of movement, I think, that is necessary to address some of these disparities that we're talking about today. But because really that issue of discipline was brought from communities all the way to the White House and to Congress. And so that would be my recommendation.
Dennis, first part of your question, what can we do right now? I think it's important that in every school district in America, we get students and parents and community members and educators around, and we have to start having a conversation about the difference between punishment and discipline. We've lost sight. Discipline, there are still consequences for your action, but the purpose of discipline is to change a behavior, and hopefully through good assistance and support. Punishment is simply delving out something, and we have devolved into a system of punishment, and it doesn't work. When you look at the second part of that, we can do now is look at the data that exists. When you look at the suspension, and 70% of the suspensions are African American, and they only make up 15% of the school body, something's wrong. And so that step is just look at that data, analyze it, and say, what are we willing to do about that? Name 3 things all of us can agree to that if we did, we believe would change that. And if we all agree that those 3 things will work, I believe they will. So those 2 things you can do right now in any school district. My last comment on this session, this one was on the professional accountability, capacity and accountability. There would be one thing, and that is that we have to change our mental model, that it is a profession of teaching. I have a degree in math and a master's, and there are a lot of occupations and professions that you can go into if you have that background. There is only one that I consider myself a professional in. There are many things I've learned to do over time, working my way through school, my second job as a teacher, all of those things. I do those things, but I don't consider myself a professional in those fields. And the sad part to me, in today's world, it is getting less and less viewed as a profession. It is being depersonalized, professionalized all the time. I mean, the idea that we hire anybody and say, you can be a teacher, and if you're really crappy, we'll make it easy to fire you. How dare you do that to the students in America? It's a profession. And I take such pride in choosing this profession when I was in 7th grade, and I worked hard in order to get there and fulfill my dream for 23 years. But when they do what they do to my profession, and the idea, and Mark talks about the law profession, I'll mention this again. When I hire a contractor, I want a licensed contractor. When I go get my hair cut, my barber has to be a licensed barber. How dare we in America that we have literally thousands of people in classrooms as the teacher of record who are not licensed to teach, and it must end now. Amen.
Way to go. Way to preach. I want to apologize to the people who wanted to ask questions. We ran out of time. But thank you. I want to thank the panel, and I think we should all thank them for a very spirited conversation.